This year, since it's Sonic's 35th anniversary, I decided to go back and play my favorite era of games. Though I grew up with the classic era of the 90s where it all began, I was forged in the GameCube era or the adventure era of the early 2000s, molded by it even. A few months back, I did a gameplay series of Sonic Adventure DX to start it off, and as I was way more into Sonic Adventure 2 Battle as a kid, revisiting the first truly 3D Sonic game after literal decades was a crazy experience. Going down memory lane with this one was interesting because there were so many aspects of it that I either forgot about or just straight up didn't notice when I played it back in the past. But something more interesting hit me as I went through the game. Sonic Adventure already kind of did everything for the series and the characters that Sonic Frontiers was trying to do, and honestly, it did it better in some ways. Hello YouTube, I am the StarChild and welcome to Tentai Kansoku, and welcome to another narrative Nebula where we explore the stories, world building, and characters of the gaming universe. Sonic Frontiers was a game that was created to kind of bring Sonic back to his roots in a sense. It was supposed to be a little on the darker and more serious side in comparison to the decade plus of games from the Meta era, which took the series away from the early to mid 2000s tone that kind of tended to take the series more seriously, and into a more childlike and almost slapstick tone that most people thought made a mockery of the series. As someone who did grow up with Sonic since the beginning, and I made a video about that mentioning how Sonic was just always part of my life since I was born pretty much, I personally think despite being about these colorful anthropomorphic animals running around, the series does do better with these darker themes and high stakes. Take the Sonic Adventure series for instance, specifically Sonic Adventure 2 as it is the darker of the two games. Government corruption on top of General Eggman shenanigans end up uncovering a dark plot of revenge and unnecessary loss of life, with humbling and thought-provoking encounters along the way that ultimately ended with a bittersweet sacrifice. And Sonic Adventure itself, Sonic and friends end up getting dragged into the events of another Eggman plot. This time he attempts to tap into the power related to the Chaos Emeralds that was sealed away by an ancient tribe to prevent the destruction of the world, only to reawaken it as everyone ends up going on their own life-changing journeys as they peek into the past and learn a thing or two about themselves and where they want to be in the future by the end of their respective storylines. And Big the Cat is there. These were stories that stayed with the people who played the games back then because they gave you this sense that what you were doing actually had weight to it. But wait, didn't my synopsis of Sonic Adventure sound extremely similar to Frontiers? I realized that after playing through it again, this game did everything that Frontiers was supposed to be doing narrative-wise. So let's break it down, shall we? The overall story of Sonic Adventure is fairly simple. This is the first fully 3D Sonic game, so it's fully voice acted for the first time and has a more in-depth story. Sonic games had stories the whole time, but it was very much show don't tell for pretty much the entire time until this one came out. And there was a lot of stuff in the manuals back then as well that's worth looking through, but I digress. Sonic Adventure starts with Eggman uncovering a legend about an ancient world-destroying evil that was sealed inside the Master Emerald by the ancient Echidna tribe of Knuckles and Angel Island fame. He decides to sneak up there and destroy the emerald to release this creature, known as Chaos, the god of destruction. He proceeds to hunt down the Chaos Emeralds and feed them to Chaos, causing him to transform into a more monstrous and destructive creature the more power he acquires, until he reaches perfection with all 7. Eggman's plan is to use Perfect Chaos to, I guess, threaten people into joining his empire or something? I have no idea. This is the first time he's really done this, and it kind of became a thing for a while, but you can guess that even if you have never actually played this one, it works out the same way as it has the other times he attempted to control some eldritch beast for his own bidding, which is to say it doesn't at all, and Sonic has to come in and clean up his mess and save the world. I really don't think he thinks these things through, or he's just that much of a narcissist that he thinks it's just gonna work for him. It's a pretty simple plot on the surface. This game was a groundbreaking experience for a Sonic game and paved the way for the future of the series for this era with a grand total of 7 sections and 6 playable characters, all with their own storylines, perspective about the events in the game, and thematic elements that come with each. Thus, the real meat of this game's narrative lies in the characters and their experiences. Sonic's story is probably the simplest one out of everyone since he is a static character and all. I'm planning on making a character analysis about Sonic and how he's changed like I did with Amy and Rouge, but the short version of what I really wanted to focus on is that I really don't think people understand what a static character is these days. He's a person that elicits change in others, and despite having flaws, does not often change himself. This is a testament to his resolve and the way that he likes to stick to his lifestyle choices. Sonic is simply a guy who does whatever he wants and has a high moral compass, which fortunately for us involves fighting Eggman, who represents this oppressive force in the universe, which is a direct contrast to Sonic, who represents freedom. We get to see a more fleshed out version of what Sonic was supposed to be back then in this game, especially with the addition of voice acting being added alongside this fully fleshed out storyline with cutscenes in the game. Sonic in the beginning is doing what he often used to be seen doing, just chilling. He's relaxing poolside, until his best bud Tails is seen in the distance, failing to keep control over the tornado. Then we see two things happen that I think a lot of people either misinterpret or purposely misunderstand. Every time these days people talk about Sonic being like the wind, someone who is really into the Hollywood generic speedster tropes of recent times always chimes in with him being some cold, unfeeling character who doesn't really give a shit about anyone else, which makes no sense, but like I said, that's for another video. Upon seeing Tails in danger, Sonic springs into action and blasts through the first stage, Emerald Coast. When he reaches Tails, he even comments that it's not like him to lose control like that, which is a trait in Sonic that I think was kind of lost over time. He fully understands his friends' skills and abilities, even more than they do sometimes. And he only really jumps in if something's wrong and they clearly need help. He knows that they can hold their own and doesn't try to push past that to show off or be a hero. Actually, when he's not chasing Eggman, a good majority of Sonic's story is spent ensuring the safety of his friends. There's a point where he and Tails get separated after journeying for the first part of the story together. I'll get to what Tails is doing later, but Sonic shows concern for him since they were shot down in the tornado. He goes off to find him, but then he gets sidetracked by Amy Rose asking for help. I talked about their relationship in my Amy video and how people misinterpret it severely, but I kind of wish that I played Sonic's story back when I wrote that one, because playing it over again made me realize that he kind of dropped everything to help her out. Then spent a good majority of his own storyline chasing after her when he realized she was in danger. Sonic doesn't actually go back to doing what he was doing and chasing Eggman down until he knows all of his friends are safe. And then, going back to what I said about him having faith in the people he cares about, he was straight up gonna kill Gamma. The only reason he didn't is because Amy convinced him not to and he trusted her judgment. He even decides to help Big the cat get Froggy back from Chaos when he randomly meets him for the first time ever on the egg carrier. Sonic is genuinely just a nice and helpful guy. He will go out of his way to help people in need, even if it's a stranger. The only character he doesn't really go out of his way for is Knuckles. And that's because A, their rivalry was in full swing when this game came out, and B, again, he has faith in his friends. Yeah, he ribs Knuckles all the time for getting tricked by Eggman. Honestly, not that he needs to be talking in this game because this man fumbled the emeralds so many times throughout his story, I swear. Side note, this is something I actually really love about the older games, even Unleashed in this sense. We see Sonic fail. Every single time they get the emeralds in this game, they somehow get finessed and then lose them to Eggman. Anyway, Sonic knows that the Master Emerald is Knuckles' duty, and he respects that. Once everyone meets back up, he sends Tails and Amy off, fights Chaos 6, and handles Eggman as usual. Then, in classic Sonic fashion, it ends with he and Tails meeting up after the end of their respective stories, probably talking out what happened on their ends, and then we get this really cool ending photo of Sonic going back to just chilling on the beach. And looking back, there really isn't that much of a difference with Sonic Frontiers, which is really one of the things that gave me hope for the future of the series. Aside from some personality changes that I feel like just stuck over the past decade or so, and things that just come with, the way that Roger Craig Smith's voice sounds and the way he's directed, Frontier Sonic is very similar to how Sonic was portrayed in the Adventure series. Of course, this is the game that showed me and others that aren't into IDW that Ian Flynn really likes making references. But those are minor dialogue possibilities that are extremely random and some people might not even hear them. I also give this one a pass because one of the points of Frontiers was to reestablish everything that kind of got shafted during the meta era. So just mentioning those things over again kind of was the point. Or the point was kind of to be like, hey, this thing is still canon. Remember that? Like, it's still a thing. Sonic in this game, just like in Adventure, is calm, confident, and focused on saving the people he cares about before anything else. And honestly, I haven't seen this dude so fucking cool in literal decades. When I tell you, I was fangirling during the Final Horizon boss fight. Like, where the hell has this man been since the GameCube era? I was really sitting there like, that's my boy. It has been so long, and it's so refreshing to see. Now, everyone else is where it really starts to get more interesting thematically. Moving on to Tails next, his entire story is about him finding his own way and gaining the confidence to become his own person by following Sonic's example. Tails and Amy actually have very similar story themes, which is pretty well portrayed in this game in my opinion, and it really shows how Sonic can affect different characters for the same reason. Tails' story centers around themes of self-reliance and independence as he learns to stand on his own. It starts out doing what he was known for back in the 90s, simply following Sonic. However, unlike in Sonic's story, Tails perceives this as sort of a competition, and his stages start out with you having to beat Sonic to the finish. My favorite thing that I noticed while playing this game is that there are very slight dialogue and even delivery differences between everyone's story. Some of the scenes even play out slightly different, which is very obvious during shared cutscenes. The game is a little rough around the edges, and this era's English voice cast has been out more public lately, so I'm sure we've all heard like recording stories and stuff that they talk about what it was like back then for them. This game was notoriously bad when it came to voice direction. Ryan Drummond famously said a lot of his lines in this game for Sonic was him reading it for the first time and then the voice director just being like, yeah, that's it, not letting him do it again. But I think the difference in script and tone of certain scenes was intentional. It gives the impression that you are genuinely playing through everyone's own perspective of these events, which really gets interesting when it comes to the differences between Amy and Tails. Tails is way more confident in his storyline than he is in Sonic's. I think this is to show like how he wants to see himself. Like I mentioned, each stage with Sonic is a race, but Tails also sees himself as more in charge in his story. He's the one that talks shit to Eggman, he's taking the lead and calling the shots, he even fights Knuckles, which both Sonic and Knuckles have no recollection of, as they fight each other in their own stories. Tails really just boosts himself up, but this is something that really only happens when he's with Sonic. Sonic instills confidence and security in Tails. When the two get separated, however, Tails loses that confidence and starts to worry about himself. We get this really interesting scene that I'm pretty sure is supposed to be a flashback to when Sonic met Tails and how Tails started to look up to him and follow him around. This inspires Tails, but not in the usual way. He realizes that he needs to get himself together because he can't keep relying on Sonic all the time. He then starts to do his own thing with his own unique stages and builds this confidence until he meets back up with Sonic and they crash land onto the egg carrier. Again, he sees himself doing the boss fights, but then when Sonic sends him off to get Amy to safety, the real peak of his character development throughout this story happens. Tails, separated from Sonic once again and all on his own, fights Eggman. This is the only storyline where we even hear about this happening, but Eggman's last resort was to blow up Station Square with a missile. The final stage is a race against time between Tails and Eggman to get to said missile first, and Tails wins and is able to use his mechanical genius to disarm it and save the town. This has a really cool tie-in and callback in Sonic Adventure 2, as Tails was apparently awarded the Yellow Chaos Emerald for his good deed here at some point. He also fights an entirely unique Eggman robot in the casino area. Tails' story ends with him being imbued with this massive amount of genuine self-built confidence in his own abilities as he was finally able to do something extraordinary all on his own. This confidence followed him into the next game, as well as subsequent games, until it stopped and his character got dragged back to being Sonic's little sidekick. In Frontiers, I felt they leaned a little too much into the Tails is smart thing. I don't know, maybe it was just the way that they wrote his interactions with Sonic, but I don't ever recall Sonic not really understanding what Tails was talking about. I think their dynamic back in the adventure era, especially with Tails becoming his own character, is probably best shown in Sonic Adventure 2, so I'll save that for whenever I get to that game. But Sonic is very much able to follow all of Tails' technical speak. Like, he's not stupid, it's just not his thing. Though there was this scene in Adventure.
Hey, transform! Did you see that?
Now how are we gonna get to the bridge?
I hate it when he doesn't listen to me.
This reads more like Sonic being like, yeah, I saw it, we're both standing here, before he starts talking about how the way that the ship changed makes their journey a little more difficult. Sonic in Frontiers has a couple of moments where he straight up calls Tails out for being too technical, which was never really their dynamic. Like I said, he is very respectful and aware of his friend's strengths and weaknesses. But anyway, we see them try to correct the inconsistencies with Tails' character by having him still lose that confidence he gained in Adventure. He's really hard on himself in his reflective journey, relying on Sonic to encourage him and build him up and remind him of all the things that he accomplished in the past. And it could just be me, but the way I feel like it was done kind of undermines the growth Tails went through in this game. Sure, he is still a kid and he would need encouragement from time to time, but it is jarring to see since he already went through that discomfort of the self in Sonic Adventure, and he pushed through it in a dire time under pressure and was able to hold his own against Eggman, both physically and intellectually, all on his own because Sonic was literally not there to save him. I think a lot of people also tend to forget that Tails was supposed to be more so Sonic's protege than his sidekick. He might be little, but he's got intelligence beyond his years, which is something that even Eggman mentions in his journal in Frontiers. Like, the main villain himself acknowledges that Tails is just as much, if not more, of a threat than Sonic. I wish we could go back to the way he was written in the early era because I feel like it just did his characters so much more justice. The contrast between Sonic and Tails is integral for their individual characters, and Tails is really a prime example of Sonic's ability to bring out the best in people. Which brings me to our next character, Amy Rose. And I mentioned this in my Amy video that I have mentioned way too many times at this point, but a lot of people severely misinterpreted Amy in this era. I really think it was because of her portrayal in Sonic X more so than any of the actual video games. Sonic X has a chokehold on people that grew up with it, man. There's an entire generation of Sonic fans that see her old character as simply being Sonic obsessed and a stalker who Sonic runs away from, but I think this game shines a light on exactly what their relationship was supposed to be the whole time. Amy's story themes are very similar to Tails, with hers being more about maturation and independence as well as focusing on empathy. It starts very normal, which makes sense as Amy was just supposed to be this normal girl trying to fit in with these extraordinary boys in extraordinary circumstances, which we see her make huge strides towards by the end of this game. She starts out simply grocery shopping and reminiscing about the past. And yeah, she's thinking about Sonic, but it's more so that she's thinking about the adventure and excitement that he brought into her life. And I'll go ahead and just link my Amy video in the description if anyone really wants to hear everything I have to say about her. Eggman flies over in the egg carrier and she is suddenly crashed into by a flicky. Before she can really register what's going on, she realizes that this bird is being chased by her main antagonist in the storyline, E102. Interestingly enough, he seems to be the first in the E-series line, acting as a prototype of sorts, but that's never really talked about. I'll get into it later, but it seems like this series of robots was originally designed to be some kind of bounty hunter group, but we'll save that for Gamma's story. Anyway, this starts the meat of Amy's story, as her entire thing is keeping this flicky safe and escaping Zero. I don't really talk about gameplay mechanics on this channel, but Amy is very slow moving and can't jump high like the others can. She can, however, use her hammer to kind of boost herself off the ground, which may possibly allow her to jump and reach higher places than the other characters can jump on their own. This really emphasizes her character just being a normal girl who is finding out her own way to do things to keep up with the others. I can't remember if I mentioned this in the Amy video, but Amy was always kind of given handicaps like this. like her car and Sonic are while everyone but Eggman is on foot, and the Pico Pico hammer itself, which was added to her character in Sonic the Fighters to make up for the fact that she isn't skilled in combat. Amy actually seeks out Sonic for help initially, but here's where I noticed something really interesting about her character here. Remember when I said Tails made himself seem way more confident and in charge in his storyline? Yeah, Amy does not actually do anything like this at all. She portrays her interactions with Sonic basically exactly the same way that he does in his story. If anything, she makes him seem a little more distant from her than he recalled, which could just be a representation of the way she views the distance between himself and her. The initial meaning is exactly the same. She just asks him to help her and the bird. He's suspicious of her and tries to nope out of it, but Amy tells him that they're just gonna tag along regardless. The lead up to Twinkle Park is very interesting to me. In Sonic's story, he and Amy walk there together before getting approached by Zero and Amy running off into the park after gushing over the cute couples discount. In Amy's story, however, she has to run to catch up with him. This is a really interesting difference in perspective, and I think it sums up their relationship perfectly. Sonic doesn't really seem to see himself running away from her like that. There are differences in the Japanese and English tone due to translation issues, I guess, as he seems to be a little more resigned to his fate and agreeable in Japanese, and annoyed but compliant with her in English. But either way, Sonic from his perspective clearly isn't running away from Amy. She, on the other hand, tends to see Sonic as being more avoidant, but she also doesn't attempt to significantly change the narrative core in her perspective, which is an interesting difference with her and Tails, as I mentioned. Tails made himself seem more confident than he really was, having Sonic rely more on him and his ideas and all that, possibly because he wants Sonic to see him as somebody more reliable and strong. But Amy, despite wanting Sonic to be her boyfriend, keeps everything pretty much a buck and really doesn't change the way that he interacts with her at all. This is because she sees and accepts him for who he is, and she has no interest in changing him. This is where I mentioned in Sonic's story that he kind of initially put his mission on a back burner in order to focus on saving Amy. Somehow the two get separated even though they go into Twinkle Park together, and there's literally only one way in and one way out, and Amy ends up getting kidnapped by Zero. Sonic is in hot pursuit, but Amy takes her time to shine with something that she is very uniquely shown to be able to do here. Amy is actually pretty combative here on her end when it comes to her first meeting with Gamma. She stands her ground and is pretty fearless despite being the captive, but she immediately shows him empathy when she realizes that he doesn't truly understand why he's following Eggman's orders. She's the only one who has ever really been able to even notice something like this, showing that she has a more perceptive nature. She ends up convincing Gamma to go against his programming with the help of her flicky friend who resonates with Gamma for reasons I'll get to in his story, but this moment really shows that she seems to have this compassionate, persuasive capability that none of the others really seem to have. And like I said, she is even able to convince Sonic not to kill Gamma when they meet later on, and he listens, realizing that she has her reasons. Amy empathizes and convinces, which is something that we see again in the more high-stakes contribution in Adventure 2. Once safe and with Tails running off to finish his own story after getting her back to Station Square, Amy decides that she really needs to handle things herself instead of relying on Sonic all the time, and she heads off to get to the bottom of things on her own. And despite everything, she succeeds in this. She goes to Eggman's base, straight up battles Zero all by herself and wins, reunites her flicky friend with his family, and then declares that she has proved to herself that she's got what it takes to stick up for herself. She's coming into her own character outside of Sonic in the same way Tails has. Though the two were driven by different motivations, they both look up to Sonic and want to be someone that is worthy of him, someone that he doesn't always have to look out for, someone that he can rely on. And where Tails wants to prove that he can live outside of Sonic's shadow, Amy wants to prove that she can become someone that he finds worth loving. She actually declares that she'll do whatever she can to become someone that Sonic won't even be able to keep up with. So her character was never supposed to be someone that simply chased after Sonic or forced him into marriage. Though the crush was a part of her character, it was well established all the way back in the late 90s when Adventure originally came out that Amy was her own character with her own strengths. In Frontiers, we see Amy having this very same come to Jesus moment, but of course in a more somber way that fit the tone of the story. And like I said a few times, I covered this more in depth in my Amy video, blah blah blah. But the short version of that is, in the Japanese version, it sort of has her acknowledge that she knows love simply isn't enough on its own, and that she needs to refine herself to become someone that she feels is more worth Sonic's time. And I just thought about this because after I wrote it, I wrote everything and I looked at Knuckles, which we'll talk about next. But when it comes to Amy, I think it was more so that she, how do I want to say? It was kind of more so that she's realizing that just blindly going head first and gung-ho about it all the time, could actually put herself and Sonic in danger, and she wants to kind of figure out a way where she can reel back a little bit, to again refine herself and become someone that's more helpful. Anyway, but in the English version, based on things that Ian Flynn said himself, he is attempting to kind of put a cap on the crush on the Sonic and move past it completely, as he felt like it wasn't really going anywhere. Though the Japanese side of things seems to kind of have kept Amy pretty similar to the way that she was in the adventure era, I still feel like the older games, yet again in her case, portrayed the development of her character better. Like I mentioned, her experiences and her storyline and adventure pushed her to be that go-getter, that encouraging girl who, despite her shortcomings, would use her strengths she had to move forward with all her heart. She doesn't like waiting around. She wants to be involved. She seeks out adventure on her own with or without Sonic, which led her to legit be the reason the world was saved in Adventure 2, contribute to the takedown of Metal Overlord and Sonic Heroes, and save the world right alongside the boys in all of the advanced games. Knuckles and the Echidna tribe get a lot more lore in this one, though his character development is a little more subtle in this game. His story is more of an introspective into himself and his purpose, as well as providing historical context and the origin of the main villain, Chaos. It also diverges a little more from the first three I mentioned. The campaign begins with Knuckles sitting in front of the Master Emerald Shrine doing what he does, protecting the Master Emerald. Suddenly Eggman shatters the emerald and releases Chaos, the god of destruction, who we find out later was sealed inside of it. It also releases a mysterious red orb. I didn't mention her yet, but if you play through this game, this character acts as the helper character, and she is actually decently important to the game, but we'll talk about that later on. We learned something really interesting about the relationship between Angel Island and the Master Emerald in this game. Angel Island, as presented in Sonic 3, is a floating island that is essentially its own country or even continent, as it has various climates and is a pretty vast landmass. It's the same here, except it's extremely simplified, possibly to emphasize the connection it has to the Mystic Ruins. We only really get to see the Emerald Shrine. Anyway, we find out that whenever the Master is disturbed in some capacity, Angel Island falls, which has crazy implications because it doesn't actually stay in one place in the sky and could totally just crash down on top of a city or a town or a small country even if something happened. Luckily here it just falls in the water near the Mystic Ruins. After this event, Knuckles' entire story is focused on him finding all the Master Emerald shards to restore it to its original state. Knuckles' levels emphasize something else I really love about this game, the continuity between storylines. Knuckles is pretty far removed from everybody else, but not entirely so. He actually crosses paths with Sonic and Tails multiple times beyond that fight by the pond near Tails' workshop. When Sonic and Tails are collecting emeralds, Knuckles is looking for the shards in a lot of the same places. In the casino, we get to see an entirely different section of the level, with Knuckles being able to glide and traverse the upper floors. There's so much cool stuff up here, by the way, like this pirate ship contraption, and there's a giant golden statue of Sonic for some reason. This is the first example of everyone's story kind of influencing the environment of the others to some degree, because you have to break the statue of Sonic in order to get the Emerald Shard. This shows environmental continuity rather than inconsistency, because this is a set location for that particular shard. The statue was not present in Sonic stories because these events seem to be happening roughly at the same time, implying that Knuckles had already broken the statue. This is further shown as Knuckles will run into a passed out Sonic and Tails outside of the casino, indicating that this is when they were attacked by Eggman after leaving. Knuckles also has a unique boss battle in the form of Chaos 2, which is the only time we even see this form, as he's the one that follows Eggman into the hotel's dining hall where the fight takes place, which makes Chaos 3 and 5 the only forms that we never actually encounter in anyone's story. After the battle, this is where Knuckles is tricked into fighting Sonic by Eggman, who tells him that Sonic is stealing the Emerald Shards, and because Knuckles is a little gullible as well as duty-bound, he totally believes this when he sees Sonic with the green Chaos Emerald. Knuckles being a little gullible is something that I have talked about in a past video, and it's a character trait that I'll probably end up exploring in a video of his own, but this was more of a callback to Sonic 3 when Eggman tricked him before. He used the Master Emerald as leverage then as well, which is just him taking advantage of Knuckles' loyalty and honor as well as his reclusive nature. This is very quickly resolved, however, as Knuckles decides that he's the one that beat Sonic from his perspective of this scene. He continues his journey and attempts to reform the Emerald, but realizes he needs a few more pieces. This is where we reach the last stage, which is another environmental interaction like with the casino. Now, if you played Sonic's story all the way through, you know about the infamous Sky Deck level. This level is notorious for being really annoying, especially in the latter half because of the constant shifting of the ship. That's actually because of Knuckles. In Knuckles' version of the level, he has to manipulate the ship's direction and tilt in order to open doors and chutes and gather those last emerald shards. This is what's causing the ship to drastically dip and turn in whatever direction he needs it to. That's such a cool world building detail, and it really makes the world and story feel intertwined in a way that I don't think was really seen outside of the adventure games. Knuckles also has to fight Chaos 6, which half the cast has to fight, making it a really interesting group effort type of thing. It's implied that Chaos doesn't actually get truly defeated by Sonic, as when Knuckles defeats him, he's able to take the Chaos Emeralds back with him to Angel Island. He ends on a more solemn note than everyone else, with Knuckles kind of accepting that protecting the Master Emerald is his purpose. Though he may never understand the entire reasoning behind it, he feels at peace now that the Emerald is back to normal and Angel Island is airborne again. Comparing Knuckles' story here to Frontiers is a little strange because he comes almost to the exact opposite conclusion at the end of the latter game in Japanese versus English. So, as most of you probably know, Knuckles' thing in Frontiers was him kind of deciding that he needed to live outside of his duty and try to explore beyond that. However, in Japanese, the conversation leads him more to the conclusion that he wants to be someone who can learn more about and preserve his culture as the last of the Echidna tribe. Like, experiencing a culture that was basically wiped out by a tragedy like his was, made him want to face his past, learn more about his people, and to preserve that culture. This feels like more of a completion of a process. Whereas the English version attempts to move him away from that in some way, Knuckles laments his duty-bound circumstances and says that he envies Sonic's freedom. Sonic then encourages him to live a little and see the world, which he honestly already does, but Knuckles said that he might just do that after they get back to normal. I don't really know how I feel about that. Thematically, Sonic and Knuckles are polar opposites, which is what sparked their initial rivalry in the first place. Though they are on friendlier terms now, the contrast between these two is often stated as, where Sonic is like the wind, free to move wherever he pleases, Knuckles is like a mountain, stubborn, dutiful, tough, and immovable. The Frontiers thing, like with Amy, kind of aims to remove a part of his character that I don't think was personally holding him back. Knuckles does indeed get out more than it was assumed he did before meeting Sonic, but he also explores Angel Island and is living his best life up there. We really don't need to give him an in when it comes to adventures, he's already been there when the others need him. Knuckles as a character is a foil to Sonic, representing attachments to the past and the burden of responsibility. The conclusion of his story in Sonic Adventure perfectly flows into a reasonable continuation and expansion of what the character can strive for given his circumstances with the Japanese version of his conclusion in Sonic Frontiers. It keeps the character and the contrast he has with Sonic intact while still giving him a natural progression of sorts. Next we have Big the Cat. I'll be honest, I thought a lot about what Big's story even contributes and how it might fit into the narrative, and it actually has a purpose, but I don't think it was 100% necessary. Big's contribution to the story and game is both comic relief and narrative context, with themes of devotion, unconditional friendship, and the courage to fight for the people you care about. As we know, Big's entire story is a fishing minigame that is of questionable quality. What is going on? I'm gonna have a seizure. I'm not okay. I can't even freaking get it in there. Okay. Oh, wow, that didn't do anything. What the heck? I'm struggling. Is that there? Okay, see. I might keep this in just so people can see what I have to deal with. Good God. This really isn't that far out of left field for the time period this game came out in, believe it or not. For some reason, fishing games and minigames were all the rage back in the late 90s and early 2000s. The slower paced and more stagnant gameplay here contrasts with the faster paced and or more high stakes tone of the rest of the game. It serves to give you kind of a break in between stories. Narratively, Big represents the everyman who is affected by the extraordinary events of this world. His story is actually the entire reason Gamma and the other E-series robots were created, believe it or not. Big's story starts out with him literally just minding his own business. He and Froggy are asleep, the latter of which is then awoken by something strange in the woods near their home. This turns out to be Chaos's tail, which broke off to follow the energy of a Chaos Emerald, which we then find out that Big was keeping one as a lucky charm, and this piece of Chaos then decides to possess Froggy and use him to swallow the emerald and bring it back to him. Now, Froggy running from Big is always played for laughs these days, but during this game, canonically, the only reason that he was running away from Big is because it was Chaos's tail inside of him that was attempting to reunite with the body and use the Chaos Emerald. Froggy genuinely likes Big and is happy to go home with him in the end. The story isn't that long, and Big really only has one boss fight, which is this really annoying one-shot contribution to the Chaos 6 fight, where you have to kind of fish Froggy out of him. Weirdly enough, no one really even acknowledges that Big was on the egg carrier. The only time anyone really meets him in their own story is when he tackles Tails, who had grabbed Froggy in the Sandhill level. In Big's story, on the other hand, you can randomly come across pretty much everyone at some point in the overworld, making me wonder if Big is like a Time Lord or just a really inconspicuous guy who people overlook for some reason despite his absolutely massive size. His story ends in a genuinely hilarious way where he somehow pilots Tails' plane and crashes it into the forest near his house. This actually serves to cover any potential plot holes since Sonic and Tails land on the egg carrier with the plane, but then Tails takes Amy and just flies off with his tails. Having Big notice and take the plane puts it right where it's needed to be in the final story. As for Frontiers, Big is actually in this game. Sort of, at least. Apparently he's not actually there, it's just a cyberspace interpretation of a rest area based on Sonic's perception of relaxing, which is based on his memories. Which is funny because I don't think he's ever really gone fishing with Big, in a game anyway. This is honestly just a really odd choice to me because after Adventure, Big became this gag character that would just like show up in random places. Like in Sonic Adventure 2 and Shadow Generations, for instance, where he's literally just there for unknown reasons. Like he happened to wander into the setting. So him actually being in cyberspace instead of being a figment of Sonic's imagination would have made just as much, if not even more sense. Lastly, E102 Gamma. Gamma's story is widely disconnected from the entire story of the game save for Amy's in a more cosmic sense, but this is arguably one of the most tragic and devastating stories in the Sonic universe. This is the first time we truly get to see what Eggman is capable of as a creator. Now, something I wanted to cover in my own personal fan story in AU is how Eggman's robotics are really not the main focus of his genius. I had the idea of kind of making him sort of live in the shadow of his father's accomplishments. I chose this personally because canonically, Eggman's greatest strength is not his robotics. It's his AI, even if he doesn't think so. He is basically creating fully sapient, not just sentient creatures out here, made of metal, but they are able to think, feel, and have, like cognitive thoughts and make decisions on their own. And Gamma is truly the first one to show the cruelty of this. Gamma, like all the badniks at the time, is powered by small animals, a flicky to be precise in his case. This goes for all the members of the initial E-series, and the cruelty of this is crazy in hindsight when you realize that Eggman literally does not need to do this. He created Omega, the last in this line, with a very advanced and unique power core that is essentially like a small star, or at the very least a car battery, as it is powered by its own energy being burned during movement. Gamma's story is objectively one of the most heavy and poignant ones in the game and is themed around free will, empathy, and redemption. As mentioned, he and his brothers, as it were created as a more advanced elite squad with the main purpose of capturing Froggy. The group is comprised of E101 Beta, E102 Gamma, our main character, E103 Delta, E104 Epsilon, and E105 Zeta. Eggman is pretty brutal with them as well. He puts them to the test, which we don't realize at the time is literally a life or death situation for a few of them until it's too late. Right off the jump, mere moments after being born, after running through a tutorial level, Gamma has to fight Beta as Eggman pits them against each other to see who's the better bot. Gamma wins and Beta, well, we'll get to that. Eggman sends the entire squad, suspiciously minus E101, to capture Froggy. All of them just get random frogs and argue about who's the right one, but Gamma is the one who actually captures Froggy here. The Doctor sends everyone else away to places that we don't see until later, but Gamma watches as they all get shafted, with Epsilon leaving a lingering gaze of distress before disappearing like the others. This is where Gamma meets Amy. He is sent into the holding cell area to get her flicky friend from her, and we get to see his perspective of the scene play out, but first he enters the wrong room. Inside this one, we find that Beta was indeed used as scraps. We see his body being torn apart and repurposed. This clearly rocks Gamma in a way that he can't really comprehend at this point, simply stating that this was the wrong room before heading into the jail cell where Amy is being held. No doubt that experience influenced his thought process moving forward though. Gamma's perspective of this scene is a little funny to me. It's not super different, but his straightforward robotic perspective makes Amy seem like more manipulative in a way than she is when she talks to him in her story. Interestingly enough, she softens when Gamma starts making his own decisions. Instead of stopping Sonic in his story, she goes directly to Gamma and stops him instead. Upon leaving the egg carrier, Gamma contemplates everything he's seen so far with what happened to Beta and the other E-Series robots and Amy's compassion and kindness. Gamma straight up deletes Eggman's ID as his master and declares his own objective: to save the E-Series robots. This is a very interesting conclusion that he's come to, and it starts to give us a huge insight on how using the small animals as a power source here actually works. The rest of Gamma's storyline is him seeking out the others in his own idea of redemption and setting them free, but that's not in reference to the robots. It's in reference to the animals inside of them. Gamma is able to track down Delta and Epsilon, who seemingly have just been sent out into the field for whatever reason, maybe to just act as basic badniks since Eggman threw them away. Beta, as we know from earlier, and Zeta, however, suffered more devastating fates. Zeta at some point was straight up turned into a war machine, resembling a giant series of cannons at the center of the hot shelter, and Beta, well, we all saw him being dismantled earlier and reshaped into something now renamed E101 Mark II, completely losing his initial name as he's turned into something more mindless. Gamma realizes that he has to end himself as well as Beta in this final battle. These two have been the main focus since the beginning of this chapter. It seems to initially have been presented as some sort of rivalry or connection based on them being the first two in the series, aside from Zero, who I mentioned earlier, but the connection goes beyond what you might imagine. Everything so far has been leading up to this moment. Gamma defeats Beta, but as Beta dies, he's able to get a fatal shot on Gamma, resulting in the death of both of them. However, a very familiar looking Flicky is released from Beta. A Flicky that approaches Gamma as he malfunctions and collapses. Memories of a family flash into his mind. The bird before him and the little bird that Amy was protecting all throughout her storyline. The entire time, these two were the siblings of Amy's Flicky, connecting the ending of her story to this one. This reveal is brilliant. The breadcrumbs were dropped all along the way but not outwardly stated. Gamma's connection to Amy's little friend is played initially in a way that would just portray Gamma gaining a conscience, and he did, but something stirred inside of him that he probably didn't really understand at the time. His connection to Beta specifically was for that same reason, and the implications here are devastating. The animals Eggman uses are not only alive the entire time, but retain some memories and consciousness while being used as a power source for these machines. This is why Gamma decided the only way to free his brethren was to kill them. because that was the only way to free the animals inside. Gamma's story has gone down as one of the most mature and deep story arcs in a Sonic game. The realization that he can make his own choices outside of his programming, alongside the decision that he made to give back that stolen life at the loss of his own artificial one, makes this storyline surprisingly dark compared to the hopeful and overall happy endings of the others. Literally everyone succeeds in their goals, learning about themselves along the way and establishing a future trajectory for their character arcs, but Gamma doesn't get that. Not really. If anything, world building and character development wise, his story really shines a light on how cruel and evil Eggman actually is, which is something I think might have been lost a little bit along the way. In Frontiers, Eggman created this daughter/helper AI in the young girl Sage. A lot of people were worried that he was going soft, and though it seems like she's really just going right along with his evil plans in a more efficient way than Orbot and Cubot, his character as a whole has actually been portrayed a little more goofy and narcissistic than actually dangerous these days. So if you've played Sonic Adventure before, you probably realized that I skipped quite a significant aspect of literally every story in this game: the flashbacks to an ancient culture. Yes, this is also something that is present in Frontiers that we got here first. I'll dig more into that if and when I make a video about Frontiers, but Sonic Adventure expanded on the pre-established civilization, the Echidna tribe. As Sonic 3 and Knuckles introduced Knuckles as a character and explained the world with the rich secrets and culture presented on Angel Island, having a game that looks more into this established culture just made sense. Every single character gets taken back in time and showed different events by a mysterious girl named Tikal, the daughter of the chief Pachacamac. While everyone in the tribe is hungry for power and coveting the mysterious Chaos Emeralds, Tikal was taught by her grandmother to not only respect the gems, but their guardian. Chaos was that guardian, protecting not only the Master and Chaos Emeralds, but the child that have lived in that area for years at this point. And for those who don't know, Chaos is actually a mutated Chao, having been altered over time by the Chaos energy, making him taller, stronger, and capable of transformation by interfacing with the Emeralds. But Chaos never wanted that power. He just simply wanted to live peacefully with his Chao friends, and eventually his new friend Tikal. The story is not presented in order, and it might be a little hard to follow for some people when they're playing through the game, but I'll go over the order of events here. Before the events of the game, the Echidna tribe actually lived peacefully near the Emerald Altar and the Mysterious Garden. As I mentioned a little bit in Knuckles' story analysis, Angel Island was actually attached to the Mystic Ruins, as you can walk straight from the pyramid area that was like the center of their village to the Master Emerald Shrine. These flashbacks beautifully illustrate the complexity and size of the Echidna civilization. This area is not only sizable, but fully fleshed out and explorable with NPCs that you can actually speak to as well. It's a lot less intricate in the present day, basically with everything being overtaken by the forest, and there's really nothing left but that central pyramid and the Emerald Altar on Angel Island. So getting to not only see this area in flashbacks, but also walk through it is pretty cool. The story here is as follows up until the point where we actually start the events of the game. Tikal's grandmother was actually the original chieftain, but her son Pachacamac took over when she passed. Where his mother was very focused on peace and harmony, Pachacamac was focused on power and conquest, which was the sole catalyst for the events that followed. The story of the tragedy starts with Tails' flashback scene. After getting transported back in time, he meets Tikal in front of the pyramid. Interestingly enough, in these flashbacks, she isn't the only one who can see him. As mentioned, you can actually talk to the other Echidna who are walking around. Most of them actually just say the same thing, but there are a few placed around the area that give a little more historical context. Tikal tells Tails that her grandmother bestowed a legend upon her that she must never forget. This is simply the Emerald Chant, as I call it, which is technically known as Tikal's prayer from here on out. The servers are the 7 Chaos. Chaos is power, enriched by the heart. The controller is the one that unifies the Chaos. She tells you that she isn't sure what it means quite yet, but she knows that it has something to do with the Chaos Emeralds. The next scene is the first of Knuckles' flashbacks. Knuckles understandably gets the most flashbacks out of everyone in the game because this history is deeply tied to his character as well as his storyline. He stumbles upon Tikal pleading with her father to just leave the emeralds alone and reveals that he is also a warmonger and has invaded and decimated other civilizations to advance his own. And he just tells her that all of this is necessary for their tribe to thrive. The scene serves to present the conflict of the past. Next we have Amy's scene. Here we see Tikal is taking it upon herself to go to the Emerald Shrine. It's a pretty short scene, but it presents the moment that she actually meets Chaos. Tikal also comes across the Chow, which, if you don't know, only tend to live in areas where the water is clean and nature thrives. This area was either off limits or just generally avoided by the tribe up until this point and the near future because of the legend and the Guardian. This is probably why Tikal seems surprised by what she finds here, even though it's basically in her backyard. The Chow are creatures that she's only really heard of in stories, but here they are right in front of her. The scene ends with the water seemingly coming to life as chaos begins to emerge. The next scene is Gamma's. It opens with the Chow peacefully singing around the altar. Tikal tells Gamma not to go any closer, but then realizes he isn't a threat. She asks Gamma if he can sense chaos, then laments her worries about her father's plan to destroy the beauty of their peaceful existence in his hunt for power. Big scene is next, and it shows Chaos seemingly speaking to Tikal and allowing her to get closer to the Master and Chaos Emeralds. She then realizes the true meaning of the prayer her grandmother taught her. The servers are the 7 Chaos Emeralds, which hold a power that is enriched by the innermost desire of the controller. The controller can refer both to the one using the Chaos Emeralds, as well as the Master Emerald, which has the power to control the chaos. Next we have Knuckles' second flashback. Tikal is now in a state of panic as she tells Chaos about her father's plan to invade the altar and use the Chaos Emeralds for his selfish desires. She begs Chaos to take the Chow and leave their home so they can be safe. He tells her that he can't leave, and she promises to go back and try to get through to her father again. The Chow come up to check on her as they notice that she's in distress. She just tells them that everything will be fine and is determined to do everything she can to protect this place and her new friends. The next scene is a part of the last section of the game, which I suppose is technically Supersonic's story, but it's simply the conclusion of the game. We finally get a look at the devastating outcome of and tragic failure Tikal had at getting through to her father. Pachacamac and his men have already attacked the altar, setting it ablaze as Tikal desperately stands in their way in one last-ditch effort to prevent the inevitable. The chief, however, is determined to become an unstoppable force in the name of advancing their tribe's power. She tells him that his lust for strength will never stop, no matter how much power they get, and she's not wrong here at all, because he casts aside any care he had for his daughter, and the warriors attack both Tikal and the Chow, knocking them to the ground and supposedly killing the little ones. This enrages Chaos, causing him to use the Chaos Emeralds himself. The last scene is kind of split between both the perspectives of Sonic and Knuckles. The next part is the last of Knuckles' flashbacks. He finds Tikal injured on the ground. She tells him that she couldn't stop her father and his men, and that something terrible has happened that no one could have predicted. Finally, we have Sonic's flashback from his story, which is a more detailed vision of the destruction caused by Pachacamac as the bodies of the Chow lay scattered at the foot of the altar and the destruction of their home. Tikal looks around in despair before running up to the Master Emerald. This scene, likely being the first one that anyone sees, as Sonic's story is the first one you can play, presents major foreshadowing for what's to come, which is why it seems like it's a little out of place. However, this is quite a genius move to put this scene at the very beginning of the game, mainly because it naturally draws on your curiosity to unravel the mystery and how all of this connects to the current day conflict. Last, we see another iteration of the scene Knuckles saw in his last flashback, but extended a bit. After regaining consciousness, Tikal runs up to the Master Emerald and recites the prayer, now fully understanding what it means and the purpose and power that the Master has to offer. She speaks her wish unto the Master Emerald and begs it to stop chaos. And that leads us to the final story of the game, the epic climax where all story points are tied together. It opens with Angel Island falling again despite the Master Emerald being intact, and we find out that Knuckles has actually brought the Chaos Emeralds back with him. Meanwhile, Eggman finds Chaos in the forest after the egg carrier crashed, only to black out and be woken up on Angel Island by Knuckles. Tails finds Sonic contemplating his next vacation and tells him that the island has fallen again. They run to check it out, and Knuckles informs them that Chaos is still alive. They scramble to retrieve the last emerald, which is embedded in Tails playing the Tornado 2 all the way from the beginning of the game, but Chaos manipulates the water that it crashed into and gets a hold of it. Chaos is able to reform after being defeated in his 6th form and absorbs all the negative energy from the 7 Chaos Emeralds to reach his full form. Perfect Chaos, a devastating lizard-like water monster capable of great destruction. Enraged and saddened by the attack on his friends and home, this is the form he took thousands of years ago in the past that decimated the Echidna tribe, almost wiping them out completely and to the point where Knuckles is the only one left in current day. And Tikal, with her wish to stop him, gave up her life and trapped her soul alongside Chaos's in the Master Emerald, up until Eggman broke them free. Chaos retaining his original form, and Tikal taking the form of that familiar red light that's been guiding us all throughout the game. Every single major character in this game is utilized. Even the helper character ended up being a major actor here. And that's pretty amazing if you think about it. Looking back on this era of gaming, these little helper aids were often used, but they really played no major role in a deeper story. Think Navi from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Yeah, she has a story reason for being there, and she does grow closer to Link as their story goes on, but she is simply a companion character that really has no deeper connection or impact as the story plays out. Tikal, however, serves this purpose, as well as being a critical presence in the overarching plotline, bringing the entire story full circle as we are now faced with the same devastation that she was all those years ago. Chaos went down in history from that moment on as the god of destruction, a name bestowed unceremoniously on him by those who survived his attack. From the moment he and Tikal were sealed into the Master Emerald with no living guardian, the Chaos Emerald scattered and the part of the civilization that held the altar was ripped from the earth and propelled into the sky in a landmass now known as Angel Island. That is, until Knuckles was born with his innate calling to guard the Master Emerald with his life. There are a few theories as to why Knuckles was chosen for this, but it is implied by the events that those who survived possibly lived on Angel Island purposely to guard the Master Emerald to prevent Chaos from being released. His existence and imprisonment was documented in murals and ancient texts, which is how Eggman even found out about him in the first place. And since we know that Knuckles was born all alone, we can assume that his parents passed before anybody was ever really able to explain anything to him, leaving him alone with his duty to explore the ruins of his own culture. Side note, Sonic Team does like to mess around with the animal traits of these characters, and echidnas are one of 2 species of monotreme that is left, the other being platypus. Monotremes are mammals that actually lay eggs, so Knuckles randomly hatching and already being an orphan is quite possible. Anyway, as Chaos regains his power and forms Perfect Chaos to continue wreaking havoc on what is now Station Square, Tikal reveals herself and explains that Chaos must be resealed in the Emerald to prevent the world from being destroyed, as she sees no other way to stop him. And Sonic, being the voice of reason, tells her that it's pointless to do that because he will simply be trapped forever with the same turmoil in his heart like he was before. This scene really shows Sonic's intelligence, as he was completely right. The entire reason that Eggman was able to even get Chaos to work for him is because Tikal simply sealed him away, still full of anger and hatred that was never resolved. The true meaning of the story can be debated because everyone has their own moment, but this really sticks out to me. You have to go through something. That's why we say that. Pushing it down, ignoring your feelings, locking them away, all these things simply keep those things inside of you to fester and grow until one day it explodes and leads to destruction. You have to live through it, feel it, resolve it. All of these things are how we work it out and move on. Everyone gathers the emeralds because, as I mentioned, Chaos was only really able to harness the negative powers of the Chaos Emeralds. Sonic can use their positive power to become Supersonic and defeat Chaos. And this is the first of those epic boss fights that this era of Sonic was known for. The difficulty isn't important here, and I imagine that I wasn't the only one who struggled as a kid, but the vibe is immaculate as you're barreling through the ruins of a city, avoiding obstacles and attacks in order to use the environment to build up enough momentum to shoot your way up to Chaos's brain to attack him, as the hype is built by the heroic and adrenaline-pumping sounds of the main theme, Open Your Heart by Crush 40. Something I will say about this is that I wish the 2 final boss tracks were switched. When Chaos gets his second win, the music changed to something darker and more sinister that serves as the thematic counterpart to the hopeful and triumphant Open Your Heart. This gives you that impression that hope is slowly dying as you think you've beaten Chaos, only for him to resurface with a full health bar and harder attacks. However, I think it should have been the opposite, starting out with a darker tone theme to symbolize that this is something higher stakes that we haven't really seen Sonic take on before, as we all go into battling something unknown and larger than life. Chaos is a force of nature, unlike anything Sonic has faced in the series, which has been a creation of Eggman up until this point. Then, when he comes back, cranking it up way past 11 with the hype and courageous main theme of the game to not only boost morale of the player, but to symbolize Sonic's unyielding confidence and optimism. The lyrics of the chorus would fit perfectly into this as well, with Johnny Gioli crying out, "Can't hold on much longer, I will never let go." As you barrel into this more difficult leg of the boss fight, it just would have fit so much better to me. After the final battle, Sonic prevails and manages to neutralize Chaos, returning to his original form and quelling his temper. This actually happened because Sonic's pure-heartedness combined with the hopeful optimism and positivity of his friends as well as the people of Station Square as they spoke their wishes into the Chaos Emeralds. Supersonic as a form ties into the mythos that the emeralds grant a wish. It's often theorized that this power is granted to Sonic from his desire to change an outcome of whatever conflict has arisen, no matter how difficult or impossible it might seem. And here we see Tikal's prayer reworked in a way, as Chaos used the negative energy of the emeralds since his wishes for revenge were fueled by hatred and despair. Sonic's positive desires clash to unify that chaos energy. The controller is the one that unifies the chaos. With Chaos calmed, Tikal, moved by Sonic's words, was finally able to show her friend that despite everything, the Chao he was protecting were able to live on and prosper even thousands of years later. Everything he did bore fruit after all, and now they live happily alongside humans, and thus Tikal, along with Chaos, move on. This ending actually really surprised me because I and a lot of other people, for some reason, remember these two returning to the Master Emerald. I'm not sure where that idea even came from, but they clearly ascend to heaven at the end. The final story of the game ties everything together, where everyone has gone through their own personal journeys and witnessed the fractions of the past. They still come together at the end to see it through. This part of the game represents hope and redemption, bringing together the overall theming of self-discovery to the unifying power of empathy and friendship. So, how did the explorations of a past civilization and coming together to correct past wrongs and make things right tie into that comparison to Frontiers I was making? Well, that game also kind of has both of those things. Throughout the game, we see glimpses into the past that give us hints about what actually happened to the ancients. However, unlike Sonic Adventure, I think it lacks the substance of an actual event having happened. It simply tells the story of a great calamity that is out of everyone's hands, decimating an entire group of people, which is very much in line with Breath of the Wild, which Frontiers was heavily inspired by. Except even then, there is a source for the big bad. Frontiers faced a lot of criticisms for a variety of things, but something that I wish they did better, especially since it was inspired by the latest Zelda, was put more depth into the ancients and what happened to them. They tried, but maybe it just wasn't as cohesive as the ancient Echidna tribe in Sonic Adventure. The thing is, there's not actually a whole lot going on there, which is exactly why it works. Sonic Adventure presents a singular event caused by the wrongdoing of one person that ended up growing into a problem that would affect thousands for years to come. The lust for power and the sort of generational trauma due to unhealed wounds that led Chaos to break free and continue his rampage. The events in Frontiers were highly personal to that specific journey that each character was going through in their section of the game. They met characters that were very similar to themselves to facilitate some sort of self-reflection. But like I said, they had already gone through their own journeys in Sonic Adventure and come to very similar conclusions in a more profound way, in my opinion. Instead of looking at someone else's last moments, each of these characters were put in a position and forced to make a decision for themselves based on their circumstance. Both of these games kind of represent the same thing, as Adventure being Sonic's first foray into 3D was supposed to be setting the stage for what the series would become moving forward, and Frontiers, as mentioned, being a kind of reset in the right direction from the meta era. It feels more meaningful to me the way it was done in Adventure. When under pressure, they took action and moved into the characters that they wanted to be moving forward. Everyone started out following the path that we knew them for in their initial debut. Tails was the sidekick, Amy was the love interest, Knuckles was the rival, but they each had more depth and development that managed to grow them beyond what we initially thought about them as characters, while still maintaining their core traits, thus creating more well-rounded and nuanced characters. Tails is Sonic's best friend and sidekick, but he learned that he could be someone who can and will stand on his own in the future if they ever needed to work apart, or if someone was needed to intellectually challenge Eggman. Amy was moved by her love for Sonic, but her admiration also led her to take inspiration from him and move herself. She embodies everything that she thinks he is and finds her own strength as she learns to hold her own with compassion and empathy, giving her that ability she has to touch hearts. Knuckles was bound by duty and never really questioned himself or that deep feeling of why he was chosen for this, but that foray into the past gave him more purpose as he comes to understand his role in culture and exactly why he is so very important. Even with Gamma and Big, we learned so much more about the way the world functions in this universe. Big, who had no dog in the race, became a valuable ally as his loyalty to his friends is something that he is known for, right alongside his role as comic relief. And Gamma shows us that there is hope that lies in the destructive advancements that Eggman threatens on the world, as he was the first in a long line of robots that would become the hope and resistance in the oppression. I think the integration in the past was done so much better in Adventure as well. The random puzzle piecey nature might be a little overwhelming to some, but it invokes the idea of mystery and really drives you forward to want to figure out not only what happened, but how it fits into the current day plotline. And everything goes together very well by the end once we play through everyone's story and finally get those final pieces. The climax of the game is the climax of those past events as well, bringing everything full circle and putting a nice little bow on it. This is something that I'll delve into when I make a Frontiers video at some point, but something that I really loved about Breath of the Wild was the visual storytelling as you unwrap the mystery of what happened 100 years prior. It was done a bit more like Sonic Adventure, to be honest, where the events kind of piece together to tell a story. The settings themselves tell stories as well, where the show don't tell mentality shines brightly as you stumble upon battlefields and the remains of villages. This was kind of attempted in Frontiers, but there just wasn't enough going on for it to be as effective. We do get some world building, sure, but it was simply more so an extension of the Emerald lore and not much was answered. If anything, there was more questions. We find that the ancients resembled Chaos actually, and eventually gave rise to the Chao, and that they used the Chaos Emeralds as well, which is why all of those things are connected, but it doesn't really tell much of a story outside of this specific game. We still don't know where the emeralds came from, especially the Master Emerald, which is what led them to Earth in the first place. It also seems that this group was simply fleeing the inevitable downfall of their society, with the villain being like this ambiguous entity that simply represented the end, hence its name. I think Adventure does this concept a bit better because, like I said, the story only contains like a singular event, and it also served to expand and explain an already established story point, i.e. Knuckles' whole deal and the function of the Master Emerald in accordance to the Chaos Emeralds. Sometimes doing something a little more simple can have a larger impact on character development and world building than trying to expand and explain something that didn't really need it, which is something that the Sonic series is unfortunately not new to, as we have seen the extensive, ever-expanding backstory of Shadow the Hedgehog and how now we know more about him than the main character of the entire series. Overall, I really loved looking back on this game. I think the earlier 3D Sonic games get overlooked. Even though I know a lot of people are trying to say that they're overrated, the game design and story layouts serve the series in ways that the newer games just don't and can't seem to replicate, which is why I think they're so fondly remembered in the first place. This was also still back in the day where stories were just heavier for kids, and that was not frowned upon at all. Giving younger people something to sit in and think about was very normal, increasing media as well as emotional literacy. I think the story of everyone figuring out their own place in the world, striving to protect their friends, making sacrifices for the greater good, and learning to accept someone's feelings and guide them through to healing is something that really sits in the hearts of anybody who played this game back then. The sheer amount of nostalgia for this era proves that. And I think that's where we're gonna leave this one. I was genuinely surprised how many similarities to Adventure the Frontiers had because I have not played Sonic Adventure DX in years. I have a lot to say about Frontiers now that I'm at the end of this because it has a decent amount of stuff going on. This is not like a Frontiers hate video, by the way. I did enjoy it, even though it was kind of bland, but you know, there's a lot of stuff going on narratively, and the differences between the English and Japanese scripts are interesting, especially since it was apparently written in English first. Which the Japanese version has changed scripts in the past. What was it? Rise of Lyric? I think Shadow, they changed it so Shadow was possessed by Lyric in the Japanese version instead of just being an asshole. I have been thinking about that Frontiers video for a while though. I kind of initially wanted to compare it to Breath of the Wild, but maybe I'll just make a separate video for that and then make a Frontiers video on its own. I really have to go back and play both of those games again because it's been a minute since I played them. But yeah, that's coming up at some point in time, I guess. And then I can dive a little deeper into the character shifts and see what it does for them narratively, even though I did kind of mention them here. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it this far, I, at this point, have no idea how long this video is going to be. So if you stuck around, thank you so much. Like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff that they make us say. I'll be here navigating the narrative cosmos one story at a time. See you in the next transmission. Bye.